Let's just wait like 1 or 2 more minutes so more people will join in.
Of course.
Okay. Yeah, we have about like 40 students, faculty here. Let's start. And so welcome everyone to join the speakers series. And this is our first meeting in the spring semester. And certainly, welcome to everyone. And today we have Dr. Jonathan Deutsch, and to kick off our spring semester speaker series. So I assume you already know sort of our rules for the speaker series. Like if you have questions, and I hope you can turn on your camera to ask a question. If like today we're using Zoom, and when we have the in-person in the auditorium, we will have another slightly different rule. But our rule is really simple: keep your question at the end, and we have time to discuss. So without further delay, I will introduce our speaker today, and Dr. Jonathan Deutsch, and he is a professor in the Department of Food and Hospitality Management in the College of Nursing and Health Professions and Drexel University. And he is a founding program director of a Drexel Food Innovation and Entrepreneurship program. He's also the vice president of the Upcycled Food Foundations, and he will talk about his experience in that work. And he is also previously was the inaugural Ronald James Bright Foundation Impact Fellow and leading a national curriculum effort on food waste reduction for chefs and culinary educators. So he did a lot of research and published a couple books, about 8 books, with as an author and also as co-authors. And he also has very fun CVs. You will see he's like food, loves food, I will say, and also love cooking, and he also loves music. So without further delay, I will give the floor to Dr. Deutsch, and hopefully I will entertain you in this lunch time. Okay, go ahead.
Thank you very much, Dr. Ma. Great to be here. Thank you for having me. And thanks to Lisa for inviting, inviting me and facilitating everything. I would ask if you're somewhere you're comfortable doing it, it would be great to see some more faces. If you're comfortable turning your camera on, I'm a good enough speaker, I think, to be able to read faces and know whether I should speed up or slow down, or I'm boring you or I'm interesting you, but not when your cameras are off. I haven't mastered that skill yet. See, I can tell that I'm amusing Aaron. See, we're already off to a good start. I will provide a little bit of, you can see this okay. I'll go to presenter view. I will provide a little bit of an overview of our research. I'm going to try to make it more storytelling oriented and engaging, because the research is published and it's all collaborative and interdisciplinary, and I'm not an expert in all of the methods. So I'd much rather you read the papers and follow up with questions rather than get into the nitty-gritty of the methods and the standard deviations and all of that. So it'll be sort of data at the end and storytelling at the beginning. And I'm happy to share all the publications with Lisa and Dr. Ma to share with all of you. So thank you, those of you I can see. It's great. And yeah, we'll get started. So a bit about our lab and kind of what got us into this world of upcycled food and food waste minimization and prevention. And then we'll get into some of the research we've been doing. So I have a background as a research chef, who are chefs who work at the intersection of culinary arts and food science. So we're chefs by training typically, and more than food scientists, but have enough food science knowledge and comfort to be able to do things like develop new food products or work with the food industry. And I think, you know, from the perspective of nutrition, public health, and you know, the way the world of higher ed works, I think that's a really important intersection that is really ripe for more professionals and more innovation. So if you think of it, I'm going to get on a tangent here already, but I think it's a good one for this crowd. So I've been kind of trained on both sides of the academy. So I started as a culinary student, chef, very traditional sort of professional path. And I think there's a number of programs that train people to be sort of complicit actors in the dysfunctional food system, right? Food science, culinary arts, arguably medicine, you know, a lot of programs that really focus on, you know, agroeconomics, agriculture science, that really, you know, poultry science, all of the related sciences teach people how to sort of keep going as is to improve the food system, you know, really incrementally, but basically perpetuate the system we have. And then there's a group of folks sort of on the other side who are very critical of the food system, folks from public health nutrition, rural sociology, people advocating for food system reform, alternative food systems, and I studied, you know, so after working as a chef, I did my doctorate at NYU in the food studies program under Mary Nessel, who very much is in that camp, you know, sort of critical of the food system. And you know, it's very hard to implement changes at scale without the cooperation and involvement of the people who are supplying the food. And so, you know, regulatory and policy is certainly one way to do that, but I think we've all seen that it's not a fast or easy or sometimes effective way to do that. So a lot of our work is really focused around working together with the food industry to make improvements, and hopefully you'll see some examples of that. So I graduated from Drexel as an undergrad and then came back about 10 years ago. And really the request of the provost at the time was we are unique in having we're a doctoral granting private nonprofit research university. Tufts is sort of our aspiration school, but we're, similar in many regards. But we're unique in that we have, through a quirk of a previous president who was a big foodie, we have a culinary arts degree. And so the challenge that kind of brought me here was the provost at the time said, look, we're the only Carnegie R1 research university in the country that has a culinary degree program. Cornell has hospitality and many places have food science and so on. But we have culinary. And so what are we doing with that? We either need to close it and let CIA and Johnson & Wales and culinary schools kind of do their thing and focus on food science and hospitality management and those kinds of fields, or we need to kind of do culinary research, whatever that means, if there even is such a thing. And so I made a case that indeed there is such a thing, and I wanted to do it here at Drexel. So we started this research lab called the Drexel Food Lab, which applies culinary arts and science techniques to improve the health of people, planet, and economy. So in a nutshell, we're using the same culinary and food science innovation methods that a big food company would use to develop all of the wonderful foods that the nutrition professionals and public health professionals are so critical of, right? Things, how do we make Doritos so delicious and pleasurable and craveable? And can we apply that to good food causes, right? And sustainability or health. And so that's really the underpinning of our method. And we do that through consumer research, product development, and commercialization. And something that makes us a little controversial is we do this work with the industry, but also with nonprofits and also with government agencies. So this has ranged from everything from the CDCs. We had a 7-year run until they got distracted by some new topics, but we had a 7-year run with the CDC on their sodium reduction in communities program, working with the cities of Philadelphia and New York and Pennsylvania hospitals statewide to improve food service by working with manufacturers to reduce sodium, reduce added sugar, increase whole grains. So some of it is very much on that vein. And some of it is very much commercial, where it's a company saying, we're interested in reducing our waste and making more money, and we want some help with that. So as long as we see some social value, we do it. What's been interesting about this work is naively, we thought that we were going to use a Robin Hood model. So we are a tuition-driven institution. We don't have deep pockets, and we're a self-supporting lab. And so my idea was, could I take some of my contacts from industry, from Nestle, from Hershey, and so on, and do some contract applied research with them, and use that revenue to support the good food research that I was interested in and that our students were interested in. And what we quickly found was that we're all interested in the same thing. The food industry has other priorities, of course, but they're also interested in good food work. They just needed a little bit more help in how to do it. So our principles are do good. So all of our work has some sort of social benefit, feed well, which means we put flavor first. We're not focused on sneaking functional ingredients into things, but rather celebrating what's already functional about the food. And then keep going, which means we don't do policy, we don't do regulatory. We really focus on market-driven solutions that people will actually want in their food products. And we always emphasize that we only have one full-time employee. I'm half-time teaching and half-time food lab, and we have a postdoctoral scholar, and everyone else is a student. So students studying nutrition, food science, culinary arts, product design. We've even had a math major, we have a bio major, undergrad through postdoc, who are focused on this kind of work. And so ultimately, our real product are producing students who will become future food industry leaders, because, you know, my hypothesis is, you know, we often, all of us, I'm sure, have some fair critiques of the food industry, but the food industry is not this, you know, monolith, evil monolith. It's made up of people, and if we can get people thinking differently, who then become food industry professionals, we may have a better food industry. So it's starting, you know, we'll see how it goes. So what I've been asked to speak about today is we have basically three portfolios of projects. One is sustainability, and a lot of that is upcycling and food waste reduction. The other part of sustainability is promoting sustainable products and sustainable ways of eating. We also do a lot of work with therapeutic foods and health promotion, food alternatives to drugs, and we do work with access, so more public health, making food more accessible, sodium reduction, sugar reduction, that kind of work. But I'll give you some background. I'm not sure I'll show you two quick videos. One from ReFed, which kind of, it's a little outdated, but it gives you a good grounding in food waste and the problem of food waste, so we're all on the same page. And one specific to our lab of how we work with industry to address food waste challenges, and then we'll get a little bit more into the meat of the presentation. And just if you can't hear or have any problems with the video, just please let me know.
Did you know that every year Americans spend nearly $220 billion growing, processing, and transporting over 60 million tons of food that's never eaten? We're wasting 400 pounds of food per person, while 1 in 7 Americans is at risk of going hungry. On farms, fruits and vegetables are left in the dirt because they're not visually perfect. In restaurants and grocery stores, extra food is purchased just to keep buffets and shelves looking full before being tossed. And in homes, confusing expiration dates lead families to pour perfectly good milk down the drain. If all this wasted food were grown in one place, this mega farm would cover over 3/4 of California. Growing this food consumes over 20% of our national water supply. And once it ends up in a landfill, it's a major contributor to climate change. Well, it's time for a solution. A national study by ReFed, a multi-stakeholder nonprofit committed to reducing U.S. food waste, reveals huge financial, social, and environmental opportunities hiding under all this waste. ReFed's roadmap shows how we can take steps now to reduce food waste by 20% nationwide, reaping benefits of over $100 billion. All of the solutions fit into the broad categories of prevention, recovery, and recycling. Prevention means avoiding food waste from ever happening through solutions like standardized date labeling, consumer education, smaller plates in restaurants, and trayless dining at buffets. These will allow us to buy what we need, store it efficiently, and keep from throwing out perfectly good food, saving businesses and families $8 billion a year. Recovery means we can save unsold food and encourage food bank donations through effective policy, tax incentives, and business education, which will double the meals donated to families in need each year. Some food scraps are inevitable, but recycling allows us to turn them into a valuable resource through composting and anaerobic digestion, which will produce an additional 2 million tons of compost annually, as well as a reliable source of energy for cities and trucks. Solving the food waste problem will require our commitment to 4 paths of action: new financing to scale proven solutions, common sense policy change, adopting of emerging innovations, and consumer and employee education. To learn more about how to cut waste, boost the economy, reduce hunger, and help the environment, get involved and visit refed.com.
So,
Did you know that every year?
If you were paying attention, you'll notice that upcycling wasn't part of their roadmap. So it is now. And that's one of the critiques, I think, that launched our work. So the next video is a little overview of how we work with industry and our students around food waste challenges. And it also features a food waste startup that came out of our lab.
Food waste is a serious problem. Some estimate as much as 40% of food in the US ends up in the trash. That's everything from you tossing out milk that's gone bad to commercial food producers trucking out tons of scraps. That second piece is really where there's a big opportunity for change. And the food lab at Drexel University is helping make it happen.
Ours is a very practical challenge. It's what do we do with all this?
Food producers come to the Drexel Food Lab with a food waste problem, and students will develop commercially viable products, what they call upcycled food.
The project we're doing right now is for Bimbo Bakeries USA, which is the largest bakery in the country. They have about $635 million of bread and other baked goods that are returned to the factory because they've reached their sell-by date.
We get returns from our different customer teams, whether it be grocery stores, convenience stores, or otherwise. And we wanted to find a means for reuse for our products.
The very first thing we do, we observe people in their natural habitat, figure out how they're interacting with bread, how they're using bread. The next thing we do is some consumer insights. We bring consumers into the classroom and do a focus group. Those develop into themes around which we generate new ideas. We prototype, we recheck them with consumers. And by the end of this really rapid 10 weeks, we will have solutions for the company to consider.
It's important for Bimbo Bakeries USA to have a dialogue and to help solve the food waste problem. We're a big company. We have an opportunity to provide a great amount of impact.
Waste is a social construct. So what you do with food determines whether it's food or waste, right? We want to reframe waste to think of it as not recycling food waste, but preventing food waste. We have a long history at Drexel of providing a lot of those ideas to our students.
I'm working on an avocado pit tea. Turns out avocado pits are really high in antioxidants. And I was like, whoa, we're just throwing these away. Like, we can create something out of this. There's nothing wrong with it. It's perfectly fine. We're just not used to using it. That doesn't mean that we can't do other things with them.
The World Bank estimates that by 2050, we're going to have to increase food production by 50% to keep up with the growing population. If you're a farmer, if you're a baker, or whatever you're doing, no one can scale 50%. But then if you factor in that 33 to 40% that we're wasting and chip away at that 50% that we need, then you start to see, okay, maybe this isn't so bad. We're getting a lot of requests from food producers who want to green their habits or make healthier food, but they need help doing that. They need ideas, they need energy, they need talent, and we can work with them to provide that.
So, it's somewhat controversial to work with industry so closely, but my feeling is you don't have $635 million of bread returned unless people are wanting to eat and eating, the 10 or so billion dollars of bread. And so it's all well and good to be critical of the nutrition of the products or people's behavior. And I think we need both kinds of strategies. But if there's to the extent that we can kind of work from within, I think that's a strategy that has a lot of potential. So I'm going to tell a story I love telling called the banana story that talks about how we got into this. This is published as well. I can send it. But we started this work in around 2015, 2016. In the Obama administration, they had a program called Promise Zones. And Promise Zones were federally designated areas that were known for their disparities in wealth. There were about 8 or 10 of them, and it wasn't a grant, but it fast-tracked programs for grants. Philadelphia, West Philadelphia in particular, where Drexel is located, was designated one of these promise zones. So the food insecurity rate nationally was about 1 in 7. In our neighborhood, it's about 1 in 4. But at the same time, you have University of Pennsylvania, you have Drexel, you have Children's Hospital of Philadelphia, you have Amtrak's 30th Street Station, these huge, rich anchor institutions literally side by side with extreme poverty. And the federal government said this is not okay, and wanted to come up with some strategies there, which I'm grateful for. So there are quite a few of these. There are multiple rounds, but we were invited by our colleagues at the EPA to participate in one program related to this federal promise zone, which was called the Food Recovery Challenge. And the idea was we have tremendous amounts of food waste from these anchor institutions like college cafeterias, side by side with widespread food insecurity and hunger. This is not acceptable. Let's do something about it. And the EPA funded this. And the EPA may seem like an unlikely funder. You might be thinking of, HHS or something like that. But of course, every organic matter, food and leaves and Christmas trees and all sorts of stuff like that, is the number one, the largest component of landfills, and doesn't need to be, right? We could be, it's absolutely mind-boggling that we're using farmland to grow corn to make biodiesel. At the same time, we're composting food that could be biodigested for energy, right? Talk about a broken system. So the EPA actually approached us initially to be a donor to this program. We have a small culinary program, and they assumed incorrectly, it turns out, that we would have a lot of food waste that could be going to the neighborhood. We also have, as I'm sure you know, food insecurity on college campuses is a pretty well-known, well-studied problem. And so we actually have very little waste from our program, because as soon as I say there's some extra whatever that students could take home, I can't even finish the sentence before it's boxed up and in a backpack. So, but nevertheless, we explored, what we could do. And I'll give you an example of one of the programs we looked at, which kind of started our journey. So we went to a ShopRite supermarket in the neighborhood. It's called Brown's Superstores. If anyone's familiar with Philadelphia, Jeff Brown, the CEO, is now a mayoral candidate. So it's all very messy in Philly politics, only to be surpassed by Boston politics, I suspect. But ShopRite is a co-op. Wakefern is a co-op grocer, so they're the owners of the individual supermarkets together form the corporation, and they're very community minded and wanted to participate in this challenge. So they worked with urban planning students at the University of Pennsylvania to come up with an intervention, and Dr. Ma and I were talking before the talk about the importance of not just looking at numbers, but looking at nutrients and food, and this will be a good example, I think. So the urban planning students, their goal was to look at the food waste, audit the food waste of the supermarket, and come up with a strategy to get this out to people as quickly as possible. And I'm sure you've seen this food recovery hierarchy. The goal was to keep things where the source couldn't be reduced and over ordering addressed. The goal was to keep as much of the food in the surplus food that was going to waste into feeding hungry people in the neighborhood, and as little as possible into their composting program or landfill. And so some food works out very well with their system. So for example, meat is animal protein is highly valued by soup kitchens, food pantries. They're always asking for more meat. And it has pretty much zero waste from the retail level. So what happens is on or before the sell-by date, the meat is moved to the freezer, and Phil Abundance, which is our food bank here in Philadelphia, picks it up once a week and distributes it. And there's pretty much no waste at that point. Other products have a ton of waste. For example, leafy greens, Phil Abundance doesn't want, because by the time they get put on a truck, taken back to the warehouse, redistributed, the lettuce that was looking a little bit wilty is now too far gone and, creates a problem for them. Milk is another example where, milk on its sell-by, yes, you could freeze it and retain some nutrients, but no one wants frozen defrosted milk. And as you know, the USDA heavily subsidizes milk, so it's everywhere. So the idea was that for these products, milk, bread and bakery items is another example. There's just so much, and the food bank doesn't want any more, sheet cakes and croissants and all that stuff. Rather than throwing it out, they would have a sort of triage window. So every day from 10 to 11 a.m., the supermarket managers in the morning do what's called culling their departments, and that means C-U-L-L, like lobster. And they go through the department and they pick anything that doesn't look good, or it's at its sell-by date, or it's looking a little wonky. And previously what they would do is just throw it out, either donate it, compost it, or landfill it, depending on the type of product it was. And under this program, they had this sort of triage window where from 10 to 11 every morning, anyone in food pantry, any emergency feeding site that's a 501c3, so covered under the Bill Emerson Good Samaritan Act, which hopefully I don't have to explain to all of you, but there's no liability, could come up and take whatever they wanted. And then after that window closed, then it would go to compost, landfill, and so on. And so it was effective in reducing the cost of carting, because businesses pay for their trash pickup. And it did reduce the waste, and it did get it to people. So that was great. And so we actually followed the food around to one of the sites. There's a shelter nearby for women and children. It's an emergency shelter. So it could be anything from, domestic violence to, their apartment doesn't have heat, or there's a flood, but all sorts of folks who go there unexpectedly, about 50 women and children. And so the chef happens to be a friend of mine who used to work in fine dining and then decided to kind of do something more meaningful in her mind and move to the shelter. So our students volunteered one day to help her prepare lunch and get to know this program. So we went with the chef to the loading dock during this triage period, and we picked up lettuce, tomatoes, apples, strawberries, bananas, a big sheet cake that someone ordered and didn't pick up, like a birthday cake, some bread, stuff like that, and then took it back to the shelter, and we worked together, and she made a beautiful lunch. She had chicken and rice that she got through purchasing from the food bank and Office of Homeless Services, then used the supermarket produce for salad, and she put out the cake as a dessert, and a big bowl of like a big stainless steel bowl of this of bananas that she got. She took a case of bananas. So the women and children go through the line, chicken, rice, cake, bananas, and have a lovely lunch. So there's 50 women and children in the shelter. There's about 60 bananas in a case. It goes by weight, but around there. So this is the interactive portion of the talk. How many bananas do you think were taken by the residents? You could put it in the chat. You can shout it out. I don't care. Let's see. All? No. All of them? No. 50 residents, 60 bananas. You're such optimistic, wonderful people. I know I would love to work with you or collaborate with you, but I would not want you. No, not more than 0. So it was about 4. Cherie wins for being closest. Nice job, Cherie. So about 4 bananas were taken. The rest were sitting there. And Beatrice looks shocked. And after lunch, the chef packs up. So sometimes as an emergency shelter, sometimes people come at odd hours. So she packed up some leftover chicken and rice. She left the cake out, and by dinner it was gone. She left a few bananas out. The salad was already dressed, and so she just tossed that. Threw it out, not tossed it. And then, what do you think she did with the rest of the bowl of bananas? She took this big bowl of bananas, to the dumpster and just threw out the rest. And then the next day, she went back to the supermarket and got another case of bananas and another flat of strawberries and more lettuce and continued. So you have this supermarket that's owned by a mayoral candidate that's patting themselves on the back for their food donation program. They happen to have money, and they have a state-of-the-art composting program, which costs them about $3,200 per pickup. So it's definitely in their interest to minimize that. But they do 40,000 pounds of compost at a time. Then you have the shelter that also pays for their trash pickup, does not have a composting program, and is essentially, with all good intentions, subsidizing the food waste of the supermarket, right? And to my conversation with Dr. Ma earlier, you have the Penn urban planning students who were patting themselves on the back for being able to facilitate this program that in their mind diverted hundreds of pounds a week of food waste, right? And it did, but it diverted it into a less sustainable way that was actually costing the people who need it most indirectly the money. So our students looked at this and said, we have a solution, a culinary solution, not a food science, not a epi planning GIS. And so we can fix this small problem with the bananas and get them to reduce their banana waste. So what did they do? What did they make? This is also interactive. I'm going back to the chat. Banana bread. Yeah, so banana bread is a terrible answer. So I'm going to pick on Solara and Kelly. Thank you. So here's why banana bread is a terrible idea. If you were paying attention, they already have cake, right? And the nutritionists in the room know that cake is a sometimes food, not an always food. And we're already arguably increasing these inequities and disparities by giving our leftover ultra processed food to soup kitchens and food pantries, right? So we're giving them cake already, which we probably shouldn't, but mental health is also part of health, and these are miserable times for people, and cake is a good thing for that. So they already have cake, first of all. Second of all, to make cake, you need other ingredients like eggs and oil and sugar. And in my opinion, to make banana bread, you need chocolate chips and rum, and it becomes expensive. Also, if anyone's made banana bread recently, about how many bananas are in a loaf? About two to three. Fine. So there's 60. So let's use 3 to be generous. There's 60 bananas in a case. That makes 20 loaves of banana bread. There's 50 women and children in the shelter. So it's not a good solution. So the students did something much lower tech, and they made banana ice cream, banana whip, which all of you know and can do, right? If you peel a banana and freeze it, and then you puree it, it makes essentially a banana ice cream. It could be, you could add milk, this whole other CACFP, so if you're familiar with the regulations, I know they've changed, but CACFP at the time, the USDA's Child and Adult Care Feeding Program, allocates 8 ounces of milk per person for shelters, per meal and snack per day. So 3 meals, 2 snacks, 8 ounces. So 8 times 5, that's 40 ounces of milk per person, including infants, in this shelter. So if you open their freezers, they're full of milk cartons just waiting for trash day that they don't pay for and that they get whether they want them or not. So they made it dairy often, but you could do it with water, you could do it with coconut milk, you can do it with no added sugar, you can add jam, you could add chocolate syrup. So what do you think the uptake was after they took this case and converted it to banana ice cream versus the earlier versions? Oh, it was 100%. So they could use all the case of bananas every day and get more servings of fruit into people who need them, not because there was an access issue, right, but because there was a limitation from a culinary perspective. Beyond the nutrition, and you can argue that bananas are not the healthiest fruit, we're not going to get into that. But beyond the nutrition, it also changed the culture, right? Because think of, you're having a miserable time, you're evicted from your apartment for whatever reason, and you have to deal with your kids, and someone says there's leftover brown speckled bananas, help yourself. You think, okay. Versus someone who says, would you like some ice cream? We made it, right? You also have teenagers in this show. Banana ice cream is eaten. Sorry, Timothy. Yeah. And apart from that, you have teenagers who are creative and bored. And so they started getting creative and they said, hey, can we make a strawberry banana? Can we make a chocolate peanut butter banana? Can we be creative and have fun? And then they took some pride and some ownership and they would mix it up themselves with all sorts of stuff. So we're really proud of this. However, and I know I'm almost at time, so now I'm going to breeze through the other stuff. So, however, I'm going to skip some stuff. That's not really a commercial solution. So we got into doing this commercially. And one of our first experiments was actually in upcycling was up your way with Commonwealth Kitchen in Boston. They had a contract to do breakfast muffins, healthy breakfast muffins, and wanted to use surplus food similar to the bananas. It ended up being an apple muffin. So we were able to work with them to develop a muffin that had a full serving of fruit, because there was some criticism, I think from Tufts actually, that the universal school breakfast was feeding children muffins, which was a fancy name for cake, and we're letting our children eat cake, and isn't that horrible? And this is refined sugar and refined flour and 3 grain exchanges and not much redeeming property. So it's still that all of that is still true, except now it has a full serving of fruit made from upcycled apple pomace. From apple juice. So this took us on this upcycling journey, and we've worked with a number of folks to develop upcycled food products and then research consumer interest and uptake in that. And I'm just going to breeze through a few slides because I know we're coming up on Q&A. So one example that I really love is from a company called Matriarch Foods. Those of you in community nutrition, Anna Hammond, the CEO and founder, used to be at Sylvia Center, which does nutrition education. She's taking scraps from fresh cut vegetables, like those adorable baby carrots that nutritionists love, that are about 50% of the carrot, and the other 50% goes to waste because they're not baby carrots. They're giant carrots that are milled into baby carrot shape for no known reason, except that kids like them and consumers like them. So all those scraps go into this no added sodium broth that could replace like a powdered broth. So we worked with her on that. One of the issues in this field is we want to get away from the stigma of upcycled food being leftovers and waste from people who have diverted to people who have not. So this was a project we did, a sort of proof of concept with Phil Abundance. And it's called Rescued Relish. It was before the term upcycled really came into fashion. And it was made with our local hipster pickle company called Pine Street. Every city has a few. And it's a chow chow, which is both a Southern and a Pennsylvania Dutch relish. A chow chow or a relish it's flexible with the food system. So if there's extra cauliflower this week and extra turnips next week, it still has its standard of identity versus, pickled cucumber, which is great in the summer in Boston, but you can't make it in the winter, right? Locally, local produce. That brand gave rise to a brand that Phil Abundance developed called Abundantly Good, where similar to this was really targeted at a higher end consumer. This one is interesting. It's taking surplus milk from Lancaster County farmers. It's making a high end sort of bougie cheese, and $1 from every pound goes back to the farmer who's making the exact same cheese in bulk for as a commodity for food banks. So, and if you look at the tagline now, upcycle, based on some research that I'll show you, is now being used. So the tagline is upcycle and uplift. And we have a number of products that have come out of this. You saw Sheetal in the video, so I won't go over her story, but a beverage made from avocado seeds, which also, by the way, makes them more compostable, because if anyone's a home composter, you've probably seen your 5-year-old avocado pits in there that are still there. But by steeping them and making this tea, then in addition to extracting the antioxidants, they become more compostable. And a lot of this work gave birth to this Upcycled Food Association. There's now over 200. We started with 9 members, founding members in 2019. We're now up to over 200. And they range from a bunch of companies you never heard of to companies like Dole that you have heard of. And we're really proud of that growth. We also now have an Upcycled Food certification. So there's over 300 products that are certified upcycled. They're using food that would otherwise be wasted, and they're turned into value-added food products. So I actually didn't get to a bunch of stuff I thought I'd get to, but I'll just show you what that is, and we can talk more about it in the Q&A. So we've done a lot of research, which I can share with Lisa after. But one of our early studies in 2017 was basically exploring what do you even call this stuff, and upcycled food was the clear winner among consumers. This was with colleagues in the business school who do marketing. The other thing that went into this work was that consumers see upcycled as a unique category. They don't see it as regular food, and they don't see it as natural or organic, but they see it as more like organic than conventional, which is a very promising thing for food marketers. We also did some work, Delphi study, trying to define what upcycled foods is. And I should have probably started with this since we're talking about it, but upcycled foods use ingredients that otherwise would not have gone to human consumption, are procured and produced using verifiable supply chains, and have a positive impact on the environment. It's the official now definition of upcycled food. Awareness of upcycled foods is very, very low still. That's very depressing for someone like me who's been working in this space for a while. It's very optimistic for marketers who feel like there's a lot of room to grow. This is a question we get a lot. Are consumers willing to pay for upcycled food, and are they willing to pay more? The conventional wisdom in the field is that upcycled food is waste, and consumers will either want a discount or it'll start a scandal if they hear that they're eating something that would have been trashed. And the answer is sort of. If you don't do anything, if you just say, do you want a granola bar or an upcycled granola bar? They want a granola bar. However, we found that with a little bit of education, we're not talking about a webinar, we're talking about upcycled food reduces food waste, or upcycled food is good for the environment, then they will pay more. What's interesting is the orange, we did emotional messaging. Won't somebody think of the children? There's hunger, there's food insecurity, this is such a waste, it's such a shame. And the green is very rational. You know, food is going to waste, it could be repurposed for this way. And they respond better to the rational messaging. We also did some work on logo design. So one of the things we learned was that every upcycled everything we used to see had an arrow in it. It makes sense to show the up direction, but consumers hate the arrow. They think of it as trash and recycling. So if you look at the new upcycled logo, it has a leaf, which they love, and no arrows, and the color green, all kind of works. So I'm going to stop here. Where we have Upcycled Food Foundation has a number of researchers. This is last year's class. This is some folks stayed on for this year's class, and a bunch of people doing research in this area. And I'm going to stop here and answer questions. And I understand Dr. Ma's facilitating that, so I don't have to choose anyone.
Thank you so much for the, you're tackling a very important question, but through a very interesting stories. Okay, now the floor is open for questions. Okay, go ahead, Dr. Nora Solomon.
Oh, well.
Yeah.
Hello, you're having a problem with my first name. This is Noel Solomon. Jonathan, I'm speaking to you from Guatemala, and I'd like to introduce the term upcycled fodder. In your pyramid, you have human food as the second level, and then you have animal food. And it seems to me in terms of preservation time and from spoilage to consumption, if we turn this into the fodder for agriculture, pigs, and poultry, not for ruminant animals, we could do a lot of things for the planet, including the reduction of greenhouse gases and so forth.
Great point. I couldn't agree more. You know, and part of it is our urbanization and our distance from traditional forms of agriculture. I mean, pigs and chickens evolved to be domesticated and stand outside the kitchen window waiting for scraps. Now that we have to truck them somewhere and worry about whether they're fermenting or molding and so on, it's been more challenging. But yes, that's a big area. So there's a new poultry company called Do Good Foods. They're actually taking supermarket waste and converting it into chicken feed, giving that chicken feed to farmers, and then buying their poultry and selling it back to the supermarket. So that's an example. And we're working with the Penn Vet School now. We have a USDA NIFA grant to convert surplus produce into cattle feed through fermentation, because one of the problems, I couldn't agree more, Dr. Solomon's, what you're saying. One of the challenges is the logistics. So what's happened in our fervor for food waste reduction, people started doing things like dropping off truckloads of produce scraps at dairy farms, and then the dairy farms didn't really have a way to manage it. The things got moldy and started fermenting, and then cows got sick. And then so they said, no more scraps, we're going to Cargill, and we're going to get our animal feed the old way. And you know, it has been injurious, I think, to the movement. So we're trying to fix that.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Questions? Erin, you have a question? Okay.
Yeah, trying to find the hand button. I think one question from more of a consumer side is that a lot of food already gets diverted to animal food or to smoothie products or whatever because it wasn't beautiful. And those things aren't labeled as upcycled. And I've heard some
Correct.
criticism of the upcycle movement, that it sort of diverts things that would have already gone to frozen smoothies stuff into other products that maybe we pay more money for, which is maybe
Yeah.
good for the producer, but doesn't actually reduce food waste. And so I think your certification is very interesting because you're likely looking into that. But yeah, I guess I'm kind of curious also about this distinction between what really is upcycled and what isn't, and just, you know,
Yeah.
what's just logical use of food, and how
Yeah.
we can think about that.
Yeah, great question. So there's a few criticisms of this. Some are founded, some are not founded. One that is not founded was actually national news. It came from Love Beets, Beets, and was in the Bay Area. And their criticism was that by diverting surplus food, we're taking food away from people who need it, right? So that if we're upcycling those bananas, that poor shelter doesn't get bananas. But the amount of wasted food is just so vast, and there's so much surplus that anyone who actually is on the ground knows that that's impossible. I mean, we're barely scratching the surface. So that's one. The point about what is and isn't upcycled is very interesting. So yes, absolutely 100%. You can argue that there's nothing new about upcycling, that the minute the sausage or the soup was invented, we were upcycling, right? And this stuff goes back thousands of years. What is new is, if you're old enough to remember the pink slime scandal, you know, many folks like Marion Nessel and Warren Belasco, who are very critical of the opacity of the food system, that we don't know where our food is coming from, how it's being made. They're not being transparent. And part of that is because when they had been transparent, they, you know, like showing how, you know, so the pink slime is actually, it's called lean textured meat. They're removing meat scraps from the bones and mechanically and mixing it into ground beef. So from a sustainability perspective, it's the right thing to do, right? Where we will kill fewer animals for meat if we're using all the parts of the meat that are on the bones. But when it comes out of a hopper at, you know, a few feet per second, it looks really gross. And so then they said, all right, well, we're not going to talk about any of our waste. We're not going to let you into our plants. Everything's going to be top secret. And that's exactly what we don't want, right? So the idea is that if we are upfront as an industry and we say, this is what's in it, this soup comes from the scraps from baby carrots, and we're not ashamed of that, and we're embracing it. And by buying this broth instead of this powdered broth, you're actually, you know, supporting, you know, a more sustainable food system. Our hypothesis was that people will embrace that, and I think it's true. Yeah, but your point's well taken. That a lot of this stuff, you know, it's not rocket science. It's been around forever. But I think what it also does is it becomes sort of an educational proxy for other things. So, you know, I believe in clean energy. I have no idea what a carbon offset or you know, when I plug my phone in to charge, I don't know if what I'm paying for is what I'm getting, right? I don't know where that money is going. I can't get my head around it, right? But when I buy an upcycled food product, I can taste it, I know it, I can learn more about it. And then I can maybe start to think, okay, I just bought, you know, tomato jam that's using overripe, you know, seconds. And I might have some, you know, overripe fruit, and I might think, oh, well, maybe I could cook this, maybe I can bake with it, maybe I can do something. And it becomes sort of a consumer education inspiration is my hope.
Cool. And Park has write something in the chat. Just gave another example for the juice in the fresh orange industry.
Yeah, that's a great example. So oranges come in lots of colors, from green to orange, and all sorts of other shades. And green on the outside of an orange gives no indication of its sweetness or deliciousness. On the inside of the orange, they're not underripe, they're just green, but they don't do well in the marketplace, and so they become juicing oranges. And the same thing with seeds. You know, people want these giant, flavorless, perfectly orange, seedless oranges that are easy to peel. And so, and you can breed them to do that, but sometimes nature gets in the way and things are not as easy to peel as they're supposed to be, or they're smaller than the spec. And so a lot of that stuff, I mean, my favorite example is celery that was perfectly beautiful, but cut too long for Walmart. And so it wouldn't fit in the little vertical slot that they had for all the celery. And if they widened it, they'd have to redo the entire, produce section. So they just rejected truckload after truckload of celery. There's a ton of examples like that. And so we need to be, I think, better consumers as well, which is really what this is all about.
Right. Yeah. Thank you. I think there must be many questions, but given the time, we have to stop here. And thank you so much again for your very entertaining presentation.
Thank you.
And hopefully in the future we can invite you back to school to talk more your research, your work. It's very, very interesting. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Have a good day.
You too.